Go drink some water right now if you're watching this, which you are if you're watching this. Hi, welcome to A Sunny Book Nook. Today it's time to talk about, and please ignore the staining of, not the fuzzy in the air, the staining of my nails from my nail polish. Just ignore that. Don't even worry about it, you know? We're talking about my favorite reads of 2024 because it's the end of the year. It's time to talk about what were my standouts. I have some of my standouts right here, and we're gonna go through this list. Ignore the fact that my voice is also sounding a little strange. I have a sinus infection, or I'm recovering from a sinus infection right now. Why it's also crucial that I drink water. These are the top 15 books I read last year, and we're going to be going up from the list. I have some honorable mentions that I will be making a video for and discussing in a Bindery exclusive video. A reminder that you can join my Bindery for $5 a month for exclusive content and to join my community over there. It's kind of like Patreon, but with the possibility of being able to create my own imprint and publish some books myself and together as a community. So anyway, just post some bonus content over there. I'm not as regular and routine with posting bonus content and bonus videos there as I would like to be. I only had a couple this past year, but if you would like to join and watch those, that would be so lovely, and thank you so much. But I'll be making my honorable mentions of 2024 and posting that video on Bindery, which is what I also did last year for 2023. Without further ado, let's get to number 15. Number 15 on my list is Worry by Alexandra Tanner. This book is so fucking funny, and I think you're gonna find a theme in my book list this year that I read a fair amount of nonfiction, a fair amount of Palestinian authors, and a fair amount of funny internet novels. Novels about the internet in a way that I don't find grating, but rather just insightful on how we as people interact with the internet, with social media in particular. Two sisters who live in New York, and one of whom has just recently had a suicide attempt. And so our main character, who is the sister of this girl, is just trying to figure out how she wants her sister to be in her life. It's a real sister story about these two women who are dealing with their weird ass family and the sort of daily horrors of existing under late capitalism. There was a scene at the beginning of this book that genuinely made me laugh out loud, and it was that they were both at Costco and they're standing in front of a soda stream, and the sister of our main character is like, you can't buy SodaStream, it's on the BDS list. And our main character is like, oh my god, fuck you, I want to make my soda. And but they're in the middle of the grocery store having this argument. And there's also a scene, okay, so our main character also struggles with being addicted to the internet, in that she can't stop stalking mommy bloggers who are anti-vax and who think that, I think this is set in 2019 also, yeah, 2019, so this is before the pandemic, and it's a very 2019 book, I would say, in terms of it really flushes out the world of 2019 in this story. Our main character is obsessed with these mommy bloggers who are convinced that vaccines cause autism, etc., and are like granola. Our main character is also Jewish. Her family's Jewish, but her mom is going through a sort of a Jews for Jesus type phase, which is and so she's just kind of baffled and upset about that, and how her mom is going down these weird internet rabbit holes as well, clearly. And also she has a very strange relationship with her mom, who is ultimately just fucking hilarious. This book is a book that brought me joy in this year. I read it early on in the year, and kind of reminds me of Big Swiss almost. If you liked that book, that was on my honorable mention favorites of last year. Kind of has that vibe, but also has a real disaffected young woman dealing with the world with humor and cynicism. I really liked this book, so that's why it's number 15 on my list. And number 14, we have Daddy Was a Number Runner by Louise Merriweather. This book was sort of a revived Harlem Renaissance classic in some ways. I think it was probably published in the mid to early 20th century, but it didn't really get as much buzz or as big of a readership as it probably should should have. So I think there's like a new edition that has a foreword or a preface by James Baldwin, I believe. Anyways, I read this early on in the year as well, I think back in February, and I also mentioned this on my podcast, Lavender Menace. If you're a listener, love to you, of course. In this book, we're following a little girl who's like maybe 11 or 12, I think, and we're in her perspective as she experiences the Great Depression living in Harlem, and the varying experiences of coming of age during this time of understanding her gender, her sexuality, her friendships, her familial relationships as her brothers start getting roped into gang affiliations, how, you know, going to school and learning is becoming less and less of a priority for other people in her family, how her mother and her dad are like fighting over the money struggles. Her dad might be stepping out on her mom. Her mom is just trying to keep the fucking lights on. Her dad doesn't have like a regular job. He's a piano player. How they do all these things to try to keep the fucking lights on, as I said. And yeah, she's like getting sexually harassed by the Jewish baker or deli man on the first floor of her building. She's getting sexually harassed by the teenage boys on her street. She's like coming to terms with herself as a person because she's so young, and, you know, contending with like her siblings and her brothers and her parents having a really strained dynamic that is still ultimately buffered or like held up through the love of family and community and joy. I thought the afterword in the edition that I read, I listened to it via an audiobook, I found that pretty insightful as well, and sort of the reflections on the sort of Black feminist politics that this book itself had, that sort of intertextually and also within the text itself it really conveys, and in telling a deeply human narrative of a young girl. I really liked this book, and that's why it's on my list. It's like an underrated American classic, I would say. At number 13, we have Body Grammar by Jules Oman. I read this book when I was in New York. I picked it up at a random bookstore bar, I think, and I started reading it and I could not stop. I devoured this. It's set in sort of like the Pacific Northwest, and our main character, Lou, is this androgynous looking teenage girl, and she gets scouted by a modeling agency, and she ends up becoming a model. We see her go through the modeling world and the modeling industry in this way, but she has a real indifference to modeling, and also she's reeling from a really traumatic event that happened that within the first few chapters of this book, where she's in love with like her best friend, and her best friend and their group of friends go over to I think the University of Washington in Seattle for like a weekend trip, and something really terrible happens. And so we basically see our main character Lou as she comes of age, as she comes to terms with her gender, her sexuality, the way that she exists in the world, and what modeling has to do with it or not. She's also in a band with her best friend whom she's in love with. Their friend group surrounding that, and this band world is also very fun to read about. It has a real sobriety and almost somberness to the storytelling, while still moving you through time and space in a pretty like progressive way. Like, you're moving through it pretty quickly and it feels very pacey, and we see the loves and the losses and the sort of relationships to family and community that our main character has and experiences and dips in and out of throughout her life. I found it very profound, very moving, so sweet and genuine as a story. You can really tell that our author is writing from a place of like truth and honesty and emotional vulnerability. And it is a lesbian story featuring this like butch androgynous main character who, in one of the early scenes in the book, she is brought into this modeling agency room. She sits down with like the woman who runs the agency, and she's like, the woman is like, okay, this is gonna be weird, I know no one wants to hear this, but are you a boy or a girl? It was just so like, there were so many moments in this book that I was just like, oh my god, like my heart aches. I really feel for these characters. I really love the way that this world has been fleshed out. I enjoyed this immensely, and yeah, that's why it's number 13 on my list. Now at number 12, we're getting into some nonfiction. Some of My Best Friends by Taja Eisen. This book is an essay collection that I found so funny, so smart, so insightful. Some of My Best Friends is a reference to Eisen talking about how, one of the essays is like, some of my best friends are white women. Eisen is, I think, a biracial Black Canadian woman. And as a Black Canadian woman, her reflections on the 2020 post-racial sort of American and North American landscape following the George Floyd protests, as well as the way that it's impacted different industries from publishing to voice acting, because she was a voice actor and a child voice actor for many years. It was really, really compelling. I think a lot of her takes, a lot of her really fleshed out interrogations of questions of diversity and identity and readership and engaging with media and whiteness and feminism, all these things, and art, like really, really smart, really interesting, well written. She talks about going to law school and how that was kind of a flop for her. She talks about the way that womanhood trauma, talks about how trauma and stories of racial trauma sort of exist within the media landscape, specifically in publishing and with books. It's a really interesting, thoughtful essay collection that I think people who have read and enjoyed books like Trick Mirror by Gia Tolentino would really enjoy. I really enjoyed this a lot. Really solid essay collection. So number 12 on my list. Number 11, I have a memoir. That is I Survived Capitalism and All I Got Was This Lousy T-Shirt by Madeline Pendleton. You probably know her from TikTok or from her clothing brand. She's been like a social media phenomenon and like force for many years now. I mean, specifically with the rise of TikTok. That's how I sort of got exposed to her. We were mutuals for a minute before I nuked my TikTok profile. She is so smart and funny and interesting, has a real developed sense of politics, and you can see where that came up and came into existence for her through her telling her own story of the way that she got into the fashion industry, her experiences at this like scammy ass college and university, the way that she has engaged in the workforce as a worker, as a member of the working class, as someone who grew up in poverty in Fresno, California, in a way that like is so interesting, so compelling. She really tells the story of her life and the experiences of grief that she's had in the aftermath of her boyfriend, her long-term boyfriend's suicide, her experiences with financial trouble. I think like this book also serves as almost like a self-help financial advice book as well, where every chapter ends with like sort of a list of rules or guidelines or pieces of advice that she has learned through her own experiences in the world as like, okay, this is some defining aspect of what you should know if you are broke and have no financial literacy, how you should deal with things like unemployment or with savings or retirement or, this sort of thing, or, a job and how to deal with getting one or losing one or leaving one. She offers a lot of really helpful and interesting anecdotes about her life and what she has learned, and has so graciously offered us as readers and listeners to her story. And I think that the vulnerability here, the beauty of her sort of like, not her success story, but rather her like the underdog like type of American success story, the way that she challenges that, the way that she talks about how the struggle that she had undergone for decades to get to a more settled place where she is now is something that like should not be reified, and it's something that she directly challenges in her writing. So really loved this book so much. Madeline Pendleton is so smart and brilliant, and yeah, she's awesome. Loved this book so much. Number 10, we got Recognizing the Stranger by Isabella Hamad. This is a very, very short nonfiction book that is half a transcription of a speech that she gave to a graduating college class, a commencement speech, and the other half being her reflections on the genocide in Gaza currently. And it was published back in, I don't remember, I think end of 2023, early 2024, or she's writing from the perspective of late 2023. And she talks about everything from literature and literary theory to, of course, her experience being a Palestinian writer, being a Palestinian woman confronted with the reality of settler violence and the Israeli occupation in this way that is so intelligent and nuanced and so smart. Everything that is written in these pages just like really grabs you and urges you to think, urges you to challenge that question of, how do we recognize the stranger? How do we encounter people who are not within our own experiences? Who do we demand empathy from and to? It's a very beautiful, short sort of collection of 2 essays, and I would really highly recommend it. It's why it's pretty high up on my list at number 10. I think it's a very quick read, but it also is very thought-provoking and well-written. I mean, Hamad, you can just tell that she is a genius, that she is so smart and so articulate and just has a real talent with writing and her pen, So very good. Would highly recommend that nonfiction title. And number 9, we have another nonfiction title that is How to Hide an Empire by Daniel Immerwahr. Someone commented in one of my recent videos, which is a wrap up where I talk about reading this book, that they had Daniel Immerwahr as a lecturer in university. And I'm so jealous of that. That's so cool because the way that this book is structured, it's sort of like each chapter talks about a different American territory, past or present, from the Philippines to Guam to Puerto Rico, like the ways that all these things, the Guano Islands, sort of chemical warfare as developed during World War I in Germany and the effects of it and its usage in concentration camps in World War II. Like there's so many details about this book that brings global and US histories together in a really coherent, cohesive narrative where Immerwahr also ultimately challenges the way that American historians and even social justice-oriented historians, like with books like Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, which is excellent and required reading, by the way, but also like books like Lies My History Teacher Told Me, or, other books of that nature that sort of try to, or do the sort of revisionist history thing where instead of focusing on the great men of American history and George Washington and blah, 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 all these other slave owners and fucking Andrew Jackson and shit, like instead we're focusing on like from the people's perspective, like what was the reality of the slaughter of indigenous peoples throughout the 19th century, that sort of thing. Like he really challenges that, almost those historians, by being like, hey, like we never talk about the territories, we never talk about the way that the American empire in a very literal sense, not just in the dropping of bombs, not just in the Cold War fights, not just in the private industry expansionism with the World Bank and the IMF. Beyond that, the very literal brick and mortar colonialism that the US has regarding these territories. And he brings it together in such a way that, he's like, okay, most historians of American history don't even touch on this topic at all. And why is that? I want to do this. And so he does. And this book, very, very like compellingly laid out. Also, like he kind of gags you at the end of every chapter with a bit of like either personal history or sort of a reveal of like, and that man was Albert Einstein, like that type of thing, like it's just so compellingly written and you can just tell that this guy knows his fucking shit. Obviously, I mean, he wrote a fucking book about it. So really enjoyed this book, highly recommend it. I think it was recommended to, I remember seeing this recommendation from this book talker, Schizophrenic Reads. I think he has a YouTube channel now as well, but he talked about this book as one of his favorites of I think 2022 or 2021 or something like that. And so it's always existed in the back of my mind as a book that I really wanted to check out, and I'm really glad that I finally did. Also, one of my coworkers really enjoyed this book as well, so I was like, okay, I gotta read it. And I did, and I really enjoyed it. At number 8, we have another memoir, They Called Me a Lioness by Ahad Tamimi and Dina Takruki. Dina Takruki was the translator and the interviewer, so the co-author of this book, because Ahad Tamimi obviously speaks Arabic. She's a Palestinian woman who sort of like got social media fame for her challenging Israeli soldiers and settlers attempting to, kick her out of her fucking house and like brutalizing her family members from a very young age. Like she was probably like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 or something like that when this first happened, and she had this moment of internet virality. And then kind of famously when she was 15 or 16, there was another video of her facing off with an Israeli soldier, and you can just like see that, the very iconic imagery of this Palestinian girl with like curly blonde hair, fighting against this Israeli soldier in front of her house. And basically this book obviously talks about her life, her coming of age, her growing up in occupied Palestine, the way that Israeli terrorism has shaped her whole life, and how her father was in prison for many years. Her uncle was killed in Israeli aggression and terrorism ultimately, and how her neighborhood would organize these marches every week, and how she got involved from a young age, how she, even as a kid, like was trying to go to class and like get good grades and study well while all this shit is happening all around her. And she ends up going to prison also when she is a teenager, and her experiences in Israeli prison, being shipped from one prison to another on this like fucking like truck thing. Oh my god, the way that she describes her own experiences, and also the way that she acknowledges her privilege in the sense of like she knows that people look at her and don't think of her as Arab or as Palestinian, even though she is, because she's blonde and blue-eyed. And so there's all this discourse about like whether or not she should be receiving the level of visibility that she does. And she acknowledges this as well within this story, within her telling her life, exploits. And she also recalls and talks about her experiences being honored as a Palestinian child and these various human rights awards, and going around the world and traveling and seeing the rest of the world, seeing South Africa and the effects of apartheid in its current manifestations, and the way that the rest of the world talks about and engages with Palestine and with Palestinians, and her vantage point as being an activist from a young age, and not because she felt a real calling to be one, but rather because it is the necessity of on the basis of just being a Palestinian living in a house that Israelis want to take over. Like, it is very powerful and moving, and especially when you contextualize the fact that this girl, she talks about all her ages throughout the course of this memoir, obviously, but like, she's so young, she's gone through so much. She wanted to be a professional soccer player, she's a huge fan of soccer, and then now she has to be, or wants to be, is compelled to be a human rights lawyer. How she and the women's prison were politically educating themselves. Like, wow, it's just such a powerful story. It's such an important book that I think everyone should read. And yeah, so that was my number 8 on the list. Number 7 is another Palestinian book. This is an anthology called Light in Gaza. It was edited by quite a few editors, and it's sort of an assemblage of different Palestinian scholars from Gaza, or Palestinian writers or activists who are from Gaza, writing about their experiences being in Gaza during the 2019 war, or the 2021 war, or just their childhoods, and from a variety of different perspectives. There is an essay in here that is about the loss of agriculture. The lighting is dying currently. I'm so sorry if it's getting way too dim in here, but I did want to finish this video today. Anyway, Light in Gaza, it's just we see the sort of rural and agricultural experiences of farmers in Palestine, and sort of the denigration and degradation of that lifestyle. Its importance in Palestinian poetry and resistance and storytelling, while it's reality of people not, wanting to continue to be farmers because it's just almost so impossible, or is made so impossible by the Israeli occupation. There's also an essay in here from an architect talking about home building in the aftermath of war, or in refugee and resettlement crises, and what we should be really taking into consideration regarding architecture and design. There's an essay in here about being queer and from Gaza. There's an essay in here from a man who started an English literature library, and him having emails and sort of back and forth with Noam Chomsky, and also the struggle of trying to get books delivered to Gaza, and how they will be held in Israeli shipping facilities and the IOF's fucking military for months and months and months, even though it costs so much money to get that shit shipped over, and to even develop these resources in the first place. It was such a compelling essay collection full of stories that will break your heart and fuel you with rage, fuel you with the righteous fury of 1,000 suns. It really just shows to you the extent to which the Israeli occupation, how Israel exists as a nation and as a settler colonial state, just requires the starvation of people in Gaza, requires the utter and absolute dehumanization of families and people and scholars, and how so many of these writers, obviously they can't live in Gaza right now. I mean, at this very moment, but also how they all had to leave in order to write and pursue their scholarly interests. I mean, a lot of these authors, like if you look them up on LinkedIn, like they are, scholars at the top of their field and are actively pursuing and creating academic work regarding their own, field of interest and their own, they're very highly educated people, essentially, very qualified, very smart, writing about their perspectives in, being from Gaza. It's a very, very important, necessary, just crucial compilation of so many varied perspectives about being from Gaza. I loved this book. It's so, so good, and that's why it is number 7 on my list. At number 6, also, I realized there's a lot of nonfiction titles on this list if you haven't noticed already yourself, but number 6 is Health Communism by Beatrice Adler-Bolton and Artie Verkant. This is a fantastic book. My bestie, whom I run the Lesbian Feminist Book Club with, she recently finished it the other night as well, and we were talking about it and how good it is, how in the first 2 chapters it sort of lays out the land, gives you some basic terminology and ideas about Marxism, about sort of this perspective on disability and health. And then in the next chapters, we go all in into what health communism is, why we should be working to achieve it, how nursing homes and the death industry of nursing homes are deeply corrupt, deeply predatory on the reality of healthcare institutions and elder care failing people, how disability and sort of psychiatric care and psychiatric institutions and asylums and the foundations of psychiatry and psychology as fields themselves are so fundamental to the fucked up nature that we regard healthcare today, and also the way that universal healthcare as a policy sort of ask is not even enough. What that even means to have basic needs such as healthcare taken seriously and taken into consideration in policy making, but also it's just the way that we understand sickness and illness and the perpetual illness of living under capitalism looks like, and in trying to understand different methods of and theories of disability and theories of illness and sickness are so interesting, compelling. This book is so good. It's so important. It is a surplus manifesto because it talks about sort of surplus populations and also work as an exploitative force that doesn't need to really exist in this way, at least. So good. You must read it. It's just phenomenal. People have been telling me to read this book for many years, and I finally did. So now it's number 6 on my list. All right, we're getting into the fiction area now. The top 5 are all fiction because at the end of the day, I still am a fiction girl. Love my nonfiction, love some nonfiction, of course, and you know this, but I love fiction. I love narrative storytelling in this way. So, number 5, How to Kill a Guy in 10 Ways by Eve Kellman. Oh my god, this book was a fucking blast. This book put me on a kick this year of reading about female serial killers that was a highlight of my summer, honestly. This book did such a good job at bringing together all these different thrillery elements and the unfolding of this whole story, where our main character has a best friend whom she hardly ever sees because her bestie is a lawyer and high powered and a bad bitch, and they just never have any time to see each other. But our main character is sort of a vigilante helper. She has all across London, I think this is set in London, yeah, all across London, she has these different flyers taped on the bathroom stalls of different bars that are are you in an unsafe situation? Is a man not taking no for an answer, not leaving you alone, stalking you? Text me at this number and I'll come save you. I'll come help you get out of that situation. And so that's her whole MO. That's what she does. She loses so many nights of sleep over this Ask M, I think is what it's called, program that a one-woman show runs herself. Really, it's her trying to get justice for, or retroactively sort of help out women who have been in situations with that she hasn't been able to help out with, because her younger sister is bedridden, stuck at home. She was raped and left college and university and has really been a shell of herself ever since. And so our main character is just so angry at the world, obviously, for what it did to her sister and for men, how they get away with this shit. And so at the very beginning of the book, she ends up trying to save this girl from this creepy photographer man, and then she ends up accidentally killing this guy. And that starts off a sort of killing spree that unfold in such a crazy way because she also ends up starting to like date this cop who's like a lead investigator on this case, on the series of murders. It is stomach flipping. And also our main character, like one of the main issues with crime thrillers for me is that our main character is always kind of fucking stupid, and our main character here is not. Like, she is on top of her fucking shit, and when she does fuck up, she's like, Jesus Christ, I know I fucked up, this is how I'm gonna fix it, or let me figure out how I'm gonna fix it. Like, she's not hapless, she's not helpless, and the way that she has to double speak around the fact that her like hot Daisy boyfriend, who is a cop, who is on her ass and on her scent, but also like, what is she gonna do about this whole situation? So yeah. And also like the way that the story unfolds, where we get to see more of the gendered violence and trauma that has shaped her life as our main character. So good. So fascinating, and such a good thriller. Just so compulsively readable, and just, I like laughed out loud and like gasped. Like my jaw was on the floor. Like I was gagged at this fucking story. The way that some of these chapters ended and unfolded, oh my fucking God. I couldn't. I love this book so much. Number 4, we have a short story collection, She's Always Hungry by Eliza Clark. I recently read this. I wrapped this up in my November wrap up. Such a great short story collection. Made me laugh out loud. Also kind of about the internet, about girlhood, grossness, the weird strangeness of being a woman in this world ultimately. And she takes it to levels of like, okay, like body horror and magic pills off the internet, and like the first story is, it's like kind of a chat room, like Reddit dark web type advice column thing, where she's like, if you want to lose weight and not have to do all this bullshit stuff, this is what you got to do. And it's like her story unfolding, and she's like, yeah, my girlfriend was like really suspect of this whole situation. If I was dating a man, then like he probably would have been less of an issue. There's also a story in here where there's this like edgelord cannibal goddess, and as the apocalypse unfolds, like, oh my God, so fucking crazy, so funny, so ridiculous, but also very just like gory in the way that it examines and pulls out all the bullshit of like womanhood in this world. Just so incredible. Eliza Clark is a fucking genius, and you'll see her again on this fucking list. Loved this book a lot. I don't have as much to say about it right now because, first of all, the sun's setting. Girl, I'm losing light. And second of all, because I already talked about this extensively, I think, in my latest wrap-up. So go watch that video. Go watch my wrap-ups if you haven't already. Then at number 3, we have Universality by Natasha Brown. This book doesn't come out till March of next year, and it's going to be a book club selection for Lesbian Feminist Book Club. Trust. I fucking loved this book. It sort of, like, each chapter follows a different sort of perspective in this unfolding saga. The first chapter is a sort of like Vulture or The Cut-esque type article. It's kind of like a long-form journalistic piece investigating this 2021 COVID lockdown party that happened in this like farmhouse in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, where a bar of gold was stolen, and there was like a cop raid on this rave, and also like all the different characters involved, like the billionaire Wall Street guy, the anarchist commune like people who are living on that land, and the right-wing journalist who this like sort of female like Steve Bannon. I don't know anything about like print journalism, but like just basically like a conservative female journalist who like writes about like the culture wars and shit. Like she has a book called No Mo Woke. Right, exactly. Basically, it's fucking unhinged ass shit. Like, all these different characters have their own motivations. We get their perspectives. We get the banker's perspective. We get the right-wing journalist perspective at the end. Like, we see the literary world from this vantage point. We see the way that people are so desperate for clout and acclaim in this, like, journalistic world. And, like, also the discussions of issues of diversity and like the way that like woke culture has gone too far or whatever, the way that it's talked about here, so fucking funny, so smart, so intelligent, and like jaw-dropping reveals throughout this very short book. Jaw-dropping. Natasha Brown is also seemingly kind of taking hits at herself in this book as well, because her first book, Assembly, is about a Black woman in Britain at this very posh party and her experiences, like just like her narrative as she's experiencing that. And in this book, like we see we see people deride upon sort of identity stories like that almost. And Natasha Brown, being a Black British writer, I think has a very interesting sort of stake and vantage point of the sort of culture wars in the Anglophone world regarding these ideas in the literary scene and in culture at large. I mean, Assembly was highly acclaimed. I think it was on quite a few National Book Award or maybe Women's Prize Booker lists as well. So yeah, I'm so excited for this book to come out and for you guys all to read it because it's good. It's short, and I love short good books. Number fucking 2. Another arc I read, Rejection by Toni Tolenthamut. Oh my fucking god. I read this a couple weeks before it came out, and I ended up interviewing Toni for the Substack that I run on Loop, the 2 O's or zeros. And I had a great conversation with him. Go listen to that podcast episode if you would like to. But you gotta read this book first because, oh my god, this book is such a gag. Like, it's fiction, so it's not a novel, but it's not a short story collection, but it kind of is. We see some recurring characters a couple times in here, but each story feels so fresh. It's very much, it's thematically about rejection and about how we deal with it or don't deal with it, how we exist within that world, like the way that identity can be used in terms of rejection or rejecting identity in itself in one of the last stories. Like, so cool, so interesting. The first story was published, I think, in the Paris Review called The Feminist, and it's about this guy who thinks of himself as an unimpeachable feminist, and we see his struggles with dating or whatever. Unhinged makes you feel so gross. This book makes you laugh out loud while also making you feel so fucking gross and you need to scrub your body, So good. I have more to say about it on the podcast, obviously, so go listen to that episode. But this is my number 2 read of the year. And number 1 read of the year, Boy Parts by Liza Clark. When I tell you this book had me on the fucking floor, jaw dropped, gagged, left, right, each new page I was reading, I was just I can't believe it. And it was just I think you can easily reduce this book to something that's oh, it's just about a hot girl who's crazy and does nose drugs. But that would be a reduction that I would find that akin to calling Brat an album that's just about doing drugs and having fun or whatever. Because no, it's more than that. It's the way that this book interrogates photography, art, the grossness of the human soul, womanhood, desirability, female friendship, toxicity, party culture, rape culture, specifically in the UK, the art world, being from the north in the UK. Oh my god, I loved this book so much, and I think it's gonna be a defining personality trait for me now, loving this book. And I know that that's kind of basic because every bitch loves this book, but yeah, anyways, I'm really running out of light here now, so I'm gonna have to say bye to y'all. I hope you enjoyed seeing this list. I'm sure it wasn't that much of a surprise if you've been keeping up with this channel this past year. And again, I apologize for my voice. I'm congested and I sound like it, and I know that, so anyways, thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to my Substack for free, or you can be a paid subscriber if you want to. Link in the description. Join my Lesbian Feminist Book Club if you would like to. We're over on Instagram, but we host our meetings on Zoom. And if you want to join the list, you gotta DM the Instagram with your email. Join my bindery for bonus content, which will be forthcoming, and that you will see if you're a paid member on my bindery. You can also follow for free on Bindery as well too, but that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Happy New Year, happy holidays, and I hope to see you in my next video. All right, bye.